Okay, hello. Welcome to Ethnic Studies and Digital Literacies in Chicanx Culture. We have Elizabeth Mendoza, Esmeralda Zavalata, Hania Morales, and Catherine Rodriguez. In this podcast, we will be mainly going over topics that have really stood out to us and share our thoughts and opinions on these themes. In this ethnic studies class, it has opened our eyes and has showed us and made us understand and learn different struggles about minorities, Latinos, immigrants, and people in the LGBTQ community and the struggles they face every day. We've learned how to use practice-based research, which has taught us to integrate theory and practice in this field. It has taught us on how to research in a real-world setting to gain practical insights and to help us explore and understand the lived experiences of people in the past and their perspectives of different ethnic groups. This has helped us to bridge theory with real-world experiences and learn more in depth about the fields of ethnic studies. In this podcast, we have several segments that we'll be talking about and we'll be discussing and sharing our thoughts and comments on. Mainly, we'll be discussing learning from queer undocumented histories of Central Americans. We will be talking about queer Central Americans in the borderlands and rewriting Latinx narratives. Hannah Morales will be discussing over and talking about things that we have learned from the podcast discussion with Katie Dominguez Maldonado and how receiving these relationships between and among queer Latinx individuals and communities. Katie Dominguez Maldonado gives us an insight of being a Honduran woman and her experience of growing up in a community where she had to adapt to being an immigrant and her experiences of growing up. Elizabeth Mendoza will be introducing and discussing things about the Chavela film and how it contributes to a complex story of queer Central Americans in the U.S. and how this film was a very important historical film. Lastly, Esmeralda Zavalata will contextualize the podcast with Dr. Yahaira Padilla and the importance of it and talking about the threatening guerrillas to forever illegals. And Katie Maldonado teaches us several things that.
Hi, my name is Hania, and I would like to start off by saying that, like Catherine said, we learned a lot from what Kaylee Maldonado Dominguez spoke about her experience and growing up as an undocumented and queer student. She, as well as the Professor Topete, talks about the fears about being a Latino in a world of white people, feeling singled out. When answering the question about how undocumented stories of Central Americans in work transform to Chicanx studies, Dominguez responds with how different stories about migration is for Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, and Cubans as is for other Central Americans, and how a large percent of undocumented people are Central American but are not shown enough. There is so much erasure when it comes to these stories of migration, and I think that she makes an excellent point on this. I think stories that come from Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, and Cubans can differ from Central Americans because they're talked about more, they're like shown on in public more or in media are shown more, but like even in films, but we don't see many like Central Americans, whether it be Honduran. We don't speak in them enough. I feel like Mexicans are usually the face of which is important and are great stories to mention, but I think Central Americans are not speak on enough. Other sources were reported like the Chavela documentary from Chavela to Frida reading and the Talk of Sophia Reed's talk. And they have so many insights on specifically on how queer people experience the world on their own. I connected a lot of these insights to what Katie Maldonado Dominguez and other resources that we were provided for. I specifically chose this segment because I connected it to the most from personal experience as a immigrant Latina lesbian woman, struggling with an immigrant family and being an immigrant myself, as well as being queer, caused a lot of struggle between my family and I. The feeling of not being able to fit in, just like Katie Maldonado Dominguez and Miss Professor Topete spoke about, was a big thing when it comes to both being queer and an immigrant, specifically undocumented. I had in my life, my whole family had to rearrange how they saw me about our values and traditions because uh, in their eyes, I was a complete different person because they saw me as mostly queer. So having a family that had completely different traditions and values because I'm queer completely shifted the way our family was because I felt like I didn't have anyone to rely on. And then in the outside world, though, a lot of people did accept me for my queerness. I was not accepted in the sense that I'm an immigrant growing up. I think I was teased a lot for my accent growing up. And so having both of these sections that are part of my identity, I think was a huge um, difference. And like they spoke about, Katie Milana and Professor Tapete spoke about fitting in was really different in living in the United States. What do you guys think of the concept of fitting in as Latina women in this society in the United States?
Well, I grew up in a very Latin based community. So growing up, it was never really racism or discrimination I got to face, which I'm very privileged for that. But now that I'm older, now that, after a whole lot of, how Trump came out with ICE and all that in 2018, and it really brought light, I do feel more aware of how people view me. Every time I see a Trump flag, I feel as if, like, do those people hate Mexicans or immigrants or colored people? Like, it's now more of an awareness.
I think going off of what Esmeralda said, I too have had like the privilege of not experiencing like the discrimination. Um, like I feel like I grew up in a community where there was like a lot of Latin people, but I feel like the schools that I went to had like like a lot of mixed people, white people, so I feel like there wasn't like a lot of discrimination, but I feel like once I went into like college, I feel like that's when I started to notice a bit more of like discrimination in a sense, but more so towards like from the people that are also Latin or like I don't know, I feel like I had a roommate who's also Mexican and she would like play songs or like bring up stuff that I guess Mexican culture like it's big on and I wouldn't really know what that is like what it was or like not or like I wouldn't really like that stuff and I feel like I would be seen as like whitewashed, which I don't think I'm necessarily whitewashed, but I feel like that's a part of the discrimination that I faced.
I feel like with kids who, I don't know your personal roommate, but I don't speak Spanish. And the term no sabo kid, like that kind of is a sore topic. And not to to quote Selena, basically, like, you're too Mexican for the Americans, you're too American for the Mexicans. It's like there's no place that you fit in perfectly.
Going back to what Elizabeth said, I feel like I can relate to that too because growing up I went to private schools and usually private schools have a lot of white, kids and I was like the only Mexican in the class. And so like there was weird experiences that I like encountered where like I was the only Mexican there. Everyone was just white and like, us as Latinos, we have like different traditions and stuff that other people don't have. And so sometimes if I would mention something, I would be seen as like weird because I do this certain way because that's how I was taught, you know? So, definitely I feel like that's maybe a way that I have felt out of place being Latina. And yeah.
Another thing that I'll say is like I don't experience like the discrimination, but I do see it a lot with my parents. Like sometimes we'll be at the store and like I don't know, like cashiers will just like suddenly like be rude and then I'll be like, "Oh, like what's up?" Like not in a aggressive way or anything, but like I do see that and I feel like that makes me like snap into like this reality that it's like we are not viewed the same here and it's kind of like like a little depressive.
I think these are all very important points about feeling singled out in this world. I maybe not had the same experience. I did grow up in a very Latino-based, um, community, but like you guys also pointed out, is that we also see it coming from other Latinos. It's like in some sections we have unity, in others we don't. I went in elementary school where, although the majority was Latino, because I'm an immigrant and English is not my first language, I was still teased at. I was still seen as different. I was still seen as, like if they were better than I was, and I always felt like I had to hide that part of me growing up. So I think all of these were really excellent points.
Going off of Hanya's segment, um, I was going to talk about queer Central Americans in the borderlands. I listened to Sofia Ruiz Alfaro's um, podcast where she discussed the importance of Chavela as an icon in Chicanx culture across the border, the borderlands specifically with queer and trans people. Okay, so Sophia talked about how Chavela really helped others navigate, um, their living, their lifestyle. She was very transgressive and, she wanted to be who she was. And in that borderland, like, that was very courageous for her and allowed other people to, um, be who they wanted to be. And also, like, the way that she was spilled into other aspects of the culture, like politics. One of the questions that was asked was, how does the podcast episode contribute to a more complex story about queer Central Americans in the US, Mexico borderlands and hemisphere? So I think the Chavela movie, you can really see that she created her own space where, she was seen as this weird person, like a rara, and this also like allowed people who were queer to, see or have a space to be able to express themselves. She went out of the roles of like the heteronormative roles and refused to follow social constructs and rules, which, made a pathway for others to continue that. One of the quotes that I got from the Chavela movie was Chavela constructs her own understanding of her lesbianism as a part of herself that she also considers natural and pure. Um, I chose this quote because I think that coming to terms with who you are as a person is extremely difficult, let alone trying to figure that out while a bunch of people are judging you. Like, that's just very courageous. I feel like Chavela being able to interpret herself as natural and pure is significant because she feels like she is, like, there's nothing wrong with her. Like, there's nothing wrong with being who she is. And I also chose the quote, it's in Spanish. It's, de primero me presenté vestida de mujer, con el pelo largo, con maquillaje, con tacones, pero parecía travesti, la verdad, which translates to, when I first started to, like go out in shows, I dressed like a woman, I had my hair long, I wore the makeup, wore heels, but I felt like that wasn't me. I chose this quote because Chavela initially dressed up as what was expected of her. As a woman, everyone expected her to act and be womanlike. However, this quote illustrates how out of body she felt. She did not feel like herself. It was more of a costume. And I think this is significant um, because it was an issue early on in her career, which affected her mental health tremendously. And we see that mental health issues amongst like people who aren't able to be themselves. So, question for you guys, have you guys ever felt like I know Hania like mentioned earlier that she was, felt out of place being not only like an immigrant but also being a lesbian like in her community, like how did that affect your mental health?
It was, I mean, it happened not even that long ago, where when I had came out, it was one of the scariest things I've ever experienced, because I knew my parents grew up religious with traditions that were not going to be something that was going to welcome me with open arms about my sexuality, so I hid it for a long time. But it really messed with my mental health, as it was draining trying to pretend like that wasn't me anymore, so that my parents would kind of leave me alone in that area that I could just keep living. But it was hard. I mean, it even drained me when it came to school. Like I love learning and doing great at school, but it even affected in that area. I stopped doing the things I love because I was trying so hard to hide that part of me and trying to fulfill what my parents wanted for me. And now things are better, but I look back at how drained I was and how at some point it became depression of trying to hide something that was part of me, part of my identity.
Esmeralda or Kat, have you guys experienced anything like this before?
Um, Personally, me, I haven't experienced anything like that before. I've seen it in my family. My cousin came out about 8 years ago, and her parents are Christian. They're Latinos. They're Christian. They're very religious, and they didn't accept that she came out. They weren't a fan of it. They didn't like it at all. Um, and they kicked her out of her house, out of their house. And they basically disowned her because they didn't agree with who she was. And it's unfortunate to see how this has this happens in so many families, so many religious families, so many Latino families, and a lot of families in general. Until this day, they still don't talk to her at all because they don't accept the fact that you know um they don't accept her, and yeah, they don't talk to her at all. So it's very unfortunate to see that, and to see her father was also very um homophobic. So her coming out was just like everything went downhill for her, getting kicked out of her house and all this stuff. So yeah, that has been my experience that I have seen in my family.
I think like a predominant factor that we see amongst um Latinx and Chicanx communities is like religion, how religion plays an important factor in like the belief system um in like households, the heteronormative roles um that are like placed upon everyone. Like my parents are Christian. Most of the people that I know are like religious as well, and like there's this rule, where it's like men and women are like supposed to be together, and I feel like that's where a lot of this conflict also sparks.
Yeah. So for me, my family, I have a cousin. She she didn't come out, but everyone just knows that she is in the queer community. She, I guess she's widely accepted. No one has shown her any hate, and we love her all the same. But mostly, there's just this fear, I feel, for a lot of families that, that children will come out as gay or anything like that. My uncle, he's really misogynistic, and he doesn't let his son play with any toy that isn't manly, I guess, since he doesn't let him play with Barbies or makeup or even try to experiment. He has an older sister, and I remember one time he tried to see what nail polish was, and he was scolded in front of everyone. And I just remember like feeling very upset and not really knowing how to react, and also how can someone just, like, he was just curious. I don't understand what the problem was, and it was a big problem apparently to him.
I think one thing that I always get confused on is like what how do you define a masculine toy? How do you what do you say a feminine toy is? Like I don't think there's like I think people just like put that name like the feminine title or like a masculine title on things so that like they have control over like what their kid does. Cause I feel like you said, how your uncle's like very misogynistic. Like he's pushing that on to that little kid, and then that kid is growing up to feel like he has to be a certain way, and therefore like this like cycle begins where it's like misogynistic, like a misogynistic person after another one. Or it'll be like this kid is now afraid to talk to his parents about like how he feels, what he's able to do, what he thinks, you know?
I also think it's so, I feel dumb that parents are so afraid of what their children play with because they become afraid that, oh, if my uh, little boy starts playing with Barbies, like what is he gonna be when he grows up? Or like just being afraid of what their children can turn out to be, Which I feel like it's dumb because they're innocent beings. Like they're just playing with toys and they just make it seem like it's a bad thing if uh a boy wants to play with girl toys or vice versa, or whatever. So like I just feel like it's so stupid that parents are so afraid of like or what color they like. If a boy likes pink, oh, don't like pink, like blue or like boy colors or stuff like that. I just feel like they shouldn't make something that's not bad look bad.
Yeah, I was watching this video about this lady. She had like a little boy and like she would let him like paint his nails and like play with like dresses and whatnot. And like there was this guy who was like commenting on it and she's like, well, why does it matter? Like a kid and has like this creative mind and they're gonna like use their imagination to, you know, play. Like it doesn't matter what this toy is. Like that's what it is, a toy. It doesn't really have like a gender to it, you know?
I think it's a big note to mention is how like and it has to do with all this how gender roles are pushed so much to avoid because I think it's gonna merge them into a sexuality that they don't accept. Like the same way I think parents treat their sons and daughters differently. 'Cause like I said, there's machismo in this community where sons are usually let to do whatever they want as long as it's masculine, but then the daughters are like pushed into this role that they have to be caretakers and um always like having to put like their family's needs like always instead of also taking care of their own.
I hate that because I experienced that. I'm like the only girl and I have two older brothers. Um, and they were always allowed to like go out late, like do whatever. I am 20 now, and I still live with my friends, and they are like, "You're out at 8 p.m. Like, what are you doing?" Like, and I'm like, "I'm literally just hanging out with people, like my friends. I'm not like doing anything bad, but there's like this protectiveness over like females, and you know, and it sucks."
Definitely, I'm the oldest. I have a younger sister, but I'm the oldest daughter. And even though my brother, he's the oldest one, so they pay attention more to him because he's older and because he's the only son. So he is let to do whatever he wants. But then I'm also responsible for like most of the caretaking here in the household, and it sucks because like I also have stuff to do, but I feel like I'm always held accountable and not my older brother.
So I think like going back to where we started, Chavela was an important like idol that created this like pathway for others to find space where they could be themselves. And I think that she also, some like rewrote a narrative that excludes queer people. So now I'm gonna hand it out off to Esmeralda.
Yeah, so there is this big narrative here in America about undocumented immigrants or queer people or people of Latinx community. Like, there's narratives all over in politics or in TVs and TV shows and films and media that we consume, as well as in even academia, like they were talking about in the podcast, how they would use their traumatic experiences to get scholarships, and how it felt like dehumanizing almost. It felt like reliving the trauma. And I never applied to colleges. I never applied to colleges, so I never got to write, and like those big papers about about what was the hardest thing you had to accomplish and how you got through that. And they just talked a lot about it, and that narrative of like you have to dump all your trauma in order to get an award or that scholarship, and how they felt it was like reliving it. It was, and how they were also talking about how when they become teachers and how when they are setting their curriculum that they want to do it differently. They don't want people to they want to use practice-based research in a way that will help further their minds, instead of putting them in a box where they have to talk about things they don't want to get scholarships. And yeah, I don't know if you guys ever had to write, very personal or traumatic experience to get a grade or to, get ahead in academia.
You know what? I've actually like never thought about that, but now that you're saying it, like all my papers to go like to university and college, like they've all just been trauma. Like, one of them was I had to talk about, like, like something that I had to overcome or something like that. And I wrote, or my teacher was asking me, she was like, what's something like really hard that you had to do? And I was like, well, like when I probably like in elementary school, my dad lost his job. And he was like the main, like he was just like income, he provided the income. So this, like at this point, like no one was, the only way that we can survive was that we would go out like onto like random streets and then look for cans. Cause you know how like you can like sell cans and then they'll give you money. So we would do that, and then that's how we like lived for like a little bit. And so she was like, perfect, like we're gonna use this and you're gonna get into all this. And like now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, okay, like good way to use my trauma, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's definitely sad how as minorities we feel like we need to basically trauma dump into essays or whatever it is for us to earn something. We have to be vulnerable and explain traumatic things we go through just to feel like we earned it, we won something.
So it was just like that podcast really kind of, it was really realizing, yeah, minorities do have to really trauma dump while the white communities or more privileged communities, they just talk about, I don't know what they would talk about, but I think the professor had said they would talk about volunteering at soup kitchens and things like that. And it's just like, I don't think I've ever volunteered a day in my life because there's things to be done here. And I think that using that the that they expect that from minorities, and they expect to just have this vulnerability, and also normalizing normalizing it, and just it's like who has the biggest trauma to get into this university. And it's very sad. And I think that the teacher who was talking, I can't remember her name, but her saying that as a teacher, she wants to change that, and she wants to grade differently and have more of, like, consider more of the composition rather the writing style is very important. I think that, with this practice-based research and her trying to also incorporate that into her own, like, teaching is really, like, is her rewriting her own narrative.
Have you
I
guys had
definitely,
like, oh, I'm sorry, you can go, Kat.
are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. What's it called? I definitely feel like, how you mentioned that she wants to do things differently. I think you said as a teacher. I think that's something good about like this upcoming generation is that so many of us, like, um, what are we like? I don't know the generation that we
Gen
are.
Z?
Gen Z, yeah. Like a lot of Gen Z, most of us are either first gen from like immigrant parents and stuff like that. And I feel like all of our experiences are shaping us and are helping us so that in the future, whenever we have children or if we ever become teachers or anything like that, we can definitely teach them and encourage them to do things a certain way since we have experience now growing up in these households, and we can also help like future generations um, or like teach them how to overcome obstacles that they face because we have faced those obstacles before and we know how to deal with them now. So I feel like that's definitely a good thing that she wants to do things differently.
Yeah.
I agree. I think being able to like first-handedly experience things like that just like helps you be able to help others and like you said, like we're basically like the future like we're helping the future generations be able to like overcome these problems and issues. Also, I was gonna ask, have you guys ever had like a rich white person being like, oh, like you're lucky because you get fast food. I can't even get that. Or no. Because I feel like I've had a lot of
Yeah,
people like,
I have.
yeah, they'll be like, well, like you get fast food, I can't get that. And I'm like, okay, like what? I need it.
They act like it's free money, like they act like we're gonna use it for personal needs, like say like something luxurious, but it's to pay for our education or pay what we need to live to keep being educated.
And we need that because we don't have the privilege that they have of having our parents pay off our school or or stuff like that.
Yeah. And like Kat was mentioning, like, a lot of people are first generation with immigrant parents, and it's really hard for parents to, scrap up as much as they can, and putting kids through college is just sometimes never in the plan.
And also now it like you feel like you have to go to college to be someone. So now it's like oh, my parents are trying to like, me and my parents are trying to like save up as much money, but it's not enough. And now I can't go to college and now I can't be someone, you know?
And a lot of jobs, they are asking for higher education. And there is also this presumption that you need to go to college to get more money and you need to get a higher education to live, be in the middle class, which is already as difficult as it could be, with this economy.
Right. There's like this negative stigma around like not going to college. And I think that I feel like I see a lot of people who don't go to college and are really successful.
I feel like it's also like ingrained more in Latino communities about the whole going to college thing because it's either like you go to college and you get this career that's gonna really like be help you like financially well, or you're gonna be like the stereotype of like having to get a job, whether it's the few jobs that makes
Or
us
do a lot of labor work, huh?
yeah.
I also think that like that gives us a lot of responsibility, I guess. Like I don't know if you guys feel this way, but like sometimes like I think in my head I'm like, okay, my parents did this for me, like X, Y, and Z. So and all they're asking for in return is like for me to be successful. But like I feel like now there's so much like issues going on, like I don't know, like I feel like I'm depressed, I feel like I have this, like and it's hard to do something, but I'm willing to like swallow all of it up in order to like make my parents proud and like make them feel like everything that they did was worth it.
Definitely. I think that's a lot on teenagers and adolescents and young people's shoulders to feel like if they don't do well, it's like you're gonna disappoint parents. And even if your parents don't say, or even if they're like, yeah, no pressure, like, like you still feel that because you see how hard your parents are working to support you educationally, and you feel like if you don't do well, you're gonna be disappointing not only yourself but them because they're working so hard and they remind you how they didn't get the same opportunities as you did, but the opportunities you do have, like you have to work really hard and pressure yourself to do very well, or else you feel like you're not gonna have life, or you're not gonna have a good life and good life to provide for your parents.
Okay, so overall in chapter 3, one of the things that I learned and that sticked was um, the discrimination in queer communities within the Latinx and Chicanx borderlands. Um, and I think this just redefines chapter 1 and chapter 2 because it just backs up. Like chapter 1 and chapter 2, we're talking about discrimination that's happening outside of our communities and cultures. And so learning chapter 3, it just like backs that up with even, more discrimination that we face. Um, yes.
I could definitely say that I never had a class like this. Um, Practice-based research, it was an introduction in this class, basically. I never heard of it. I definitely never practiced it. And it was just it was a new way to learn and research. And I think that in chapter 3, or throughout the whole year, really, we did get to incorporate our own experiences, what we were learning with, and how we saw discrimination. Like Liz said, in the first half of the year, in chapter 1 and 2, from the, like the outsider's perspective, almost like with those reading those kids' books. I don't know if you guys remember, like with the white kids' books, or how like those videos of the kids also. And now, like in chapter 3, there was Chavela with her being misogynistic, as well as her opening up new doors for the queer community. It was very learning experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think like being able to like go into the class and being able to it was almost like just talking about my life basically. And I found that to be like the learning was easier because you're extracting it from your own experiences, you know?
I definitely agree on that. I think, like, Esmeralda said about not having a class like this before, but I feel like I connected so much to it because, yeah, it applies to your life. Like, also Elizabeth said, how you feel like it's easier to understand, it's easier to, maybe not to keep assignments like, per se, but I think when it connects so much to your life and you find so much familiarity, you feel like you're so into the class, you're so into the topics. Like, hearing like all the topics, like when I saw the assignment that said, um, queer undocumented families, I was like, oh my God, like this feels so targeted, but like in the best way possible because it's something that I can connect to and know so much knowledge on from personal experience. I definitely think it was interesting that transitioned from first learning about like was mentioned, the outsider's perspective of uh the outsiders going against our community and other communities of people of color, and then it turned into issues within our culture, within our community, which I think was so interesting to learn about and to experience in a class.
I think definitely, like you all said, growing up and going through these experiences that we've read about, and listening to podcasts that you can relate to has definitely made this learning experience easier, um, and easy to comprehend and to understand the struggles that we still face today and that we faced back then. And I think that definitely this class has motivated me to learn more about struggles that we continue to face and ways to try to change or make a change, you know? And yeah.
I think that with this, like, learning experiences, like, overall, I feel like our contributions to, like, social justice is just to, like, be aware and, like, hear people out and also basically just live, laugh, and love, guys.
Yeah, main takeaway: live, love. No, but I was a good experience. Like, I really enjoyed the class in a way that you said our social justice is learning, like having that empathy towards people and having an open mind and just going through life with, awareness of how you treat people. And even going back to like the first chapter, I think, with spirit murder and just being really like aware of how people feel and how you treat others.
I think also being in a classroom full of people that can understand and just get it and having an amazing professor that also understands from their personal experience just makes the class even more like unique and special. Like it doesn't even feel like at this point in class, it just feels more like a group where you can just talk about it.
So that was our podcast on the ethnic studies and digital literacies in Chicanx cultures. If anyone has anything else to say, go ahead, and if not, then we'll end it here.
I would just say that being in this class, I think it's the first class where I felt very comfortable in because I can relate to my peers and we share common, obstacles that we faced, and it was a good class. So, yeah.
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 All right. Thank you guys. Yeah.